Greetings and welcome to episode 3 of Dispatches from a World Gone Mad. I'm award-winning investigative reporter Greg Schwartz here in beautiful Marin County, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And my partner there in the Valley of the Sun is Kevin Dean, attorney at large. We're here today to focus on a critical, momentous topic: the end of Donald Trump's foul domain. What a joyous occasion for humanity this is. And yes, historic in ending this criminal regime, preventing them from getting another 4 years to wage their war on humanity and the 99%, and having a chance to save the planet. I cannot emphasize enough what a momentous sigh of relief I think so many of us are breathing to finally get that rotten swine and all his foul cronies out of the White House. Thank God.
And if you like what you see, please do us a big favor, hit the like button and subscribe. We're just working out the kinks on this show, and we're hoping that we can continue to bring these discussions. And as Greg talked about today, we're talking about the end of Trump's foul domain. I can't tell you how many people that I saw over the last 2 days just absolutely blissful, celebrating, day drinking, doing cartwheels in the streets, dancing and ending to bring in the end of Trump's foul domain. And I'll cheers to that. Virtual background with beer. And so we want to talk about, you made a claim there at the beginning, Greg, that this is a historic with Biden's inauguration. I want to ask you about that, and then we'll get into some of the specific executive orders and actions that Biden's already taken the first 2 days. But what do you think makes Biden's inauguration so historic?
Well, it's less about Biden per se, of course. There's not much historic about him. It's getting rid of Donald Trump. Okay, I mean, I think what a lot of Republican supporters still don't understand after all this time is that the majority of Americans have felt like we've been living in an occupied country for the past 4 years. This is not something that should be underscored, because that's just something that have we ever had that in America? Not in our lifetime. I mean, the Bush-Cheney regime was pretty evil, but it didn't feel like. I mean, the Trump regime was kind of Bush-Cheney on steroids in many regards, and many of these policies were kind of being put in place back then. But you still didn't. At this time, there was this sense that these guys were just coming from a truly like Nazi-esque sort of philosophical perspective, along with just being such pure gangster criminal grifters. Everything the Trump regime done really is less about their way they view things than just the fact that they're just con men. And they're all about, everything they've done has been about transfer of wealth from the 99% to the 1%. Perhaps epitomized by Skull and Bonesman Steve Mnuchin being installed to lead the looting of the Treasury for the 1%. So hallelujah to getting that bastard out of there. And we know Biden's been a servant to the corporatocracy throughout his career, but I like to think he's starting to get, a little wiser along with being a little older. I think he really knows it's not like it was 10 years ago. He can't try to govern like Obama did. We need to go big to solve these huge multiple crises that are going on with the pandemic, the depression, the climate crisis. There's just, we got to go large. I think he knows this. And so I think we're going to see better. And they better because, otherwise they'll get crushed in the next midterms again. So they need to deliver the relief that people need. I think they're ready to do it. And we also need to highlight how evil the Trump regime was and try to start teaching the Republican supporters about why that was just a dead-end pathway for humanity.
So I'm glad that you acknowledge that by claiming this was historic, it's less about Biden, more about Trump. And so, I mean, I totally agree with you there. And most people would agree that that Biden's administration and his goals and the composition he's going to be making in his cabinet is not too historic. There's been a few selections which have been historic. Looking at the Department of Interior, a couple other picks involving, I can't think of the transgender person that he picked. Whoever, do you remember who that was for the deputy position? But yeah, so there's some historic diversity going on in the cabinet that we're seeing extend from the Obama administration for sure. And but you know, there's something to be said. I mean, what we just all survived over 4 years of Trump was some hyperbolic, fictitious bullshit. You know, like, you know, it was definitely historic in a sense of how effective he was at reframing reality and using the media to accomplish it. But when you look at what the agenda was and what the Republicans managed to do under the Trump administration, I don't know that much of it was really historic in a sense that it was different than what they've been pushing to do over the last 50 years. You talk about the transfer of wealth and the agenda of the Republican Party to basically strip the working class of all their political capital and move all the wealth.
Not to mention their financial capital.
Political and financial capital. But that's been their agenda for 50 years. And they became more bold, certainly, in carrying it out. And perhaps to me, the historic moment of the Trump administration is their ability to convince white working class people that voting for rich people's interest is within their interest. And we're going to be dealing with that for the next 4 years. And we're already seeing some backlash from Trump supporters and Republicans as to whether or not Biden's first acts as president are good for working class people. And before we get to some of the more economic and environmental implications of Biden's acts, what did you think of Biden's first acts on a health-related front, notably stopping the withdrawal from the World Health Organization and beginning a coherent and detailed response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, certainly rejoining the World Health Organization was just as overdue as rejoining the Paris Climate Summit. Not that either one of these things is going to save us in itself, but you know, this whole America First thing was a complete bunch of bullshit that was part of the con to sucker working class people into believing that the Trump regime had their best interests in mind, because it's not about America. We are all citizens of this planet. And so you can't just, this isolationist agenda was only going to hurt us all, especially when you think about climate change and a global pandemic. Hello, global pandemic means you have to work globally to solve it. You can't think we can just do this on our own. So it was just, that was just so sickening. And I think this ties in with the propaganda that helped really fuel the Trump era the whole time, which comes from that QAnon garbage. And you can put aside the more sensationalistic aspects of it with the pedophiles and the cannibals and all that nonsense, but just the basic premise of it, that they duped so many people into believing, not just the real cultists, but also most of the Republican supporters. They duped everyone of those people into believing this fiction that Trump is some kind of outsider taking on the deep state, which was never true. We talked about this the past couple of weeks. Trump's not an outsider. He was never taking on any deep state. And so that's, that ties in with this whole MAGA, America First bullshit. And that's something that we really need to work to refute, along with how he exploited the reality of corporate media bias to convince all his supporters that corporate mainstream news is all fake news all the time. No, it's often biased, but it's not all fake news all the time. And so we have a real issue there, and we need to see the Biden administration do something, and the Democrats have to press him for this, to do something to rebuild trust in the media, which means we have to break up. I think we need antitrust action. We can't have 6 corporations owning 90% of the media. That has created an Orwellian effect that has brought us to these multiple crises where people don't trust the news. And so we need a robust, independent news structure to be financed and grown to help us evolve from this dangerous dangerous state of affairs that we're currently in.
I wanted to touch on a couple things you just said. You mentioned basically the crashing reality of the QAnon conspiracy, and I think nothing made it more clear to the people that have been hoodwinked by it is when Trump didn't pardon any of his conspiratorial wingnuts after the January 6th insurrection attempt.
Which wingnuts are you talking about?
All of them. Any, he didn't pardon any of the folks at the Capitol on January 6th. And so,
yeah, and he sure wasn't pardoning Julian Assange or Edward Snowden either. And anyone who thought he was gonna really needs to get woke.
Yeah, I didn't anticipate that at all. I mean, because those Trump was all about perpetuating the power of the national security state. And I'll just speak to the viewers here for a second, but with the
Hi, Rocket.
With the
go ahead.
And but there were a lot of folks on the alt-right who really expected Trump to pardon the insurrectionists, and when they didn't, and we see a pardon for Lil Wayne, they were pretty upset, and they started to think, wait a second, maybe we've been brainwashed. And so I thought it was hilarious, and I have to admit, the shit stirrer in me was secretly hoping that Trump would pardon those people, the insurrectionists. And I was hoping we would see the not only just for fun, I would like to have seen what would happen if he'd have pardoned the insurrectionists. But I also was hoping that we would have seen a large scale pardoning of folks in prison for drug crimes and a major real criminal justice effort, reflecting his meetings with the Kardashian. Trump never
gave a rat's ass about criminal justice. Come on.
But Trump really missed an opportunity to save his reputation. I think he could have done a lot of outsider things that would have been good for the country. And
he never cared about what's good for the country. It's all
I agree, but I'm just pointing out for the people who are still clinging to some fake and false notion that he had their interest in mind. He had an opportunity with the absolute pardon power to just stick it to the oppressive American government that we have in the deep state and pardon thousands upon thousands of people. He could have done that, and nobody could have done a damn thing about it, and he didn't do it. Because why?
He proved he was the deep state's bitch.
Yeah, he's a fake.
Yeah, he proved he was the deep state's bitch when he backed down from releasing the JFK files. Remember, he came in saying he was going to get the JFK files, and then they said nope, and then he's like, nope, sorry, can't do it. I mean, talk about a dead giveaway.
He could have released the JFK files, and there was lots of speculation that the reason why the Democrats, conspiratorial speculation, that the Democrats were moving forward with impeachment to stop him from releasing classified dirt on the Dems and other establishment reputes. And none of that happened. I actually would have had a modicum of respect for Trump if he had done something to that extent, or released the JFK files, made mass pardons, done something to at least provide something in his history and legacy to establish that he was anti-establishment. He wasn't.
But he's not. He was never anti-establishment.
It's a con.
Yeah,
you've all been had, and I agree with that. Yep. But when you look to what Biden did, I think there's one of the big themes we see, whether it be with rejoining the WHO or actually trying to develop a coherent COVID-19 response, or rejoining the Paris Accords, the Paris Climate Change Plan, is a commitment to science. And so that's something I'm excited about, is recognizing reality in science, something that Trump and his delusional supporters have been denying for 4 years. And we have no time at this point in our history, our collective existence, to deny reality, to deny science. We're, as you say, in multiple crises, health and environmental. So I'm pretty excited to see that. One of the discussions, though, is coming out of his decision to rejoin the Paris Climate Change Plan and to stop or revoke the permit for the Keystone Pipeline, is this idea that somehow that Biden is anti-oil, or that he's anti-jobs in the energy sector. And when you look at the data, it just doesn't pan out. Of course, there was an oil boom that occurred in the Trump administration, where we see an average of about 9 million barrels a day. Under Obama, peaking at about 13.4 million barrels, but recently it's leveled off to 10. And when you look at the boom that occurred under Trump, what we've seen in OPEC's response is just a gigantic production war, you know? And so, yes, prices have plummeted. That's been relatively good for consumers on the low end of oil, but for the oil business in general, I mean, the price drops that we've seen are probably attributable to the gigantic price war that's going on in the international markets, and the global output that we're doing now isn't markedly different than under the Obama administration, and the number of oil jobs that we see now are not really that much higher than we were seeing at the height of the Obama boom, which Biden was part of.
The problem is the Republican Party has just been pushing nonstop propaganda since before Trump came in, but especially even more so these past 4 years, that the Green New Deal is a job killer and climate change is a hoax. And so you have all these people who just don't understand science, actual scientists who are Republicans who don't get it. And it's like, I think we touched on this already. It's like they're tearing down the EPA. Why is it that no one who supports the Republican Party thinks it's important to protect the air and the land and the water from being poisoned by big polluters? This disconnect continues to boggle the mind. And he did deregulation. Trump did so much great deregulation to create jobs. Okay, first of all, most of the jobs he was creating were part-time jobs, so there weren't a whole lot of ones. And then this war on the EPA, that's I'm really looking forward to getting some actual science back in charge of the EPA. Of course, the EPA was already long time corrupt by bipartisan action with regulatory capture, but now maybe we have a chance to make it a valid agency again. And so, but there's just this thick wall of propaganda that we still need to work on refuting, because people think, we need the Green New Deal to fight climate change. But you still have rank and file Republicans who think, oh no, that's going to destroy our economy, because there's so much bullshit propaganda put out there by the fossil fuel industry. And GOP couldn't exist without the fossil fuel industry, just like they couldn't exist without the Electoral College, because they'd never win an election without it, and they never get the money they need to compete without fossil fuel donations. So we need to go at these two things. And the GOP is in a weak state right now. Democrats need to really put the boot on their neck while we've got them down, not kind of try to let them up. Sure, Biden, one thing about Biden is that he does have a history of working bipartisan, since he's such a centrist that he's often Republican in many areas. But again, I like to think he's evolved a little bit, and hopefully he understands that this is a moment where we not only have to go large to save everyone who's struggling so much, we have to really govern and show the Republican Party that we're going to use their own tactics against them. And we're going to get things done. And if they don't want to, then that's going to be their problem, and their base is going to be calling to them. I mean, action. We need action.
Okay, just a couple of points in response to what you've raised. First of all, as it relates to why are Republicans been so anti-environmental regulation, I think there's a couple of reasons for it. One is that rich people generally can put themselves in a position to not be as impacted by environmental chaos or catastrophe as opposed to working class people. So they feel like the external, they're not going to be impacted by the effects of environmental catastrophe as the rest of us are. Two, there's a significant wing of the Republican Party, and Gore Vidal reported on this in the 1980s in the Reagan administration, that is pushed by fundamentalist Christian evangelism that believes that there's no point in saving the world because Armageddon is coming, and the second coming of Jesus will be here, and the point of Republican politics is to bring about that end through fulfilling prophecy. And so, I mean, this is a legitimate, not legitimate in the sense of it makes sense, but this is a real component of what is driving partisan politics in this country for the last 40 years, in the sense that there's no need to save this planet, because there's going to be a rapture for all those people who are going to be eligible. And who
Yeah,
cares
that does
about what happens
explain
to
a
the
lot of
planet
their
after,
puzzling
right?
actions, doesn't it?
Well, it explains the whole moving the capital to Jerusalem and why Trump, was big about that. That's all
Okay.
dominionist theory. It's all about fulfilling prophecy and bringing about the end of the world. And it's just, it just blows my mind that these same Republicans are concerned about Islamic fundamentalism when it's in fact Christian fundamentalism that is driving foreign policy and domestic policy in this country to a large degree for 40 years. And that's why getting back to science and embracing science is a positive thing. But I would just want to say, I'm not optimistic that these nominal measures, canceling the Keystone Pipeline, re-engaging in the Paris climate change accords, are going to be anywhere sufficient to avert
it's a start. It's a start,
looming
and it's a good
catastrophe, right?
start.
But it's not necessarily indicative that the Biden administration is going to push our energy priorities away from fossil fuels sufficiently to make this happen. And that's what I was getting at with my earlier point, is that the Obama administration saw a boom in production, really set the stage for Trump to take credit for things that occurred, that he maybe accelerated with some of the deregulation stuff. But I'm not too convinced that that these couple of acts are going to be sufficient to move us towards a new energy paradigm.
They're not supposed to be sufficient. It's step one. Okay. So, I mean, you look down this list of executive actions. This is a pretty good first day, if you ask me. It's not, again, it's a start. It's a good start. And it's light years from where we were going 180 degrees the wrong way with the Trump regime on all of these issues. So just like turning a car around and driving off in the other direction is basically what these executive actions are doing. And so that is a very good thing. Obviously, we need to do a lot more. And so, yeah, we can be suspicious of how John Kerry's basically been put in charge of the climate agenda, another skull and bones guy who we need to be wary of, because they're always more about the grift than they are about for humanity. So I'm very suspicious of Mr. Kerry, but I'll be keeping a very close eye on him. And then, gosh, it's just, we have so many problems here. Where do you even
another
begin?
thing that you said, though, this is an opportunity for Democrats to basically put their foot on the necks of Republicans and push an agenda through. And I think that's giving too much credit to Democrats. That one, they have some sort of coherent agenda, and two, that there's some sort of coherent,
the squad does. I'm looking
party.
for the squad, for Bernie and the squad to really get vocal here and push the Democratic Party to the left. We need to keep pushing them. And, we've come a lot farther in the past 5 years than we ever did before. So to me, there's some momentum there, and we need to keep pushing for that. And let's also not leave out, here's something, key issue that could affect all of this, is we're just now less than 6 months away on UAP task force, that's unidentified area, the new word to avoid UFO. This UAP task force is now mandated by the legislation that was just passed to report to Congress on what they know about UAPs. And so that's going to be interesting, I think. Of course, this could be another Project Blue Book style whitewash like we saw at the end of the 60s. But also, who knows, right? These past few years with Lou Elizondo and Tom Stars Academy, this could be a huge issue for the Biden administration to get some things done. Who knows? I'm certainly going to be following that one closely as well.
Yeah, and I think last night you and I had a brief exchange about potential disclosure and a Blue Book style co-opting of the messaging as relates to what was that documentary I texted you about? Close Encounters
Stephen Greer one?
Stephen Greer, yeah. And so Stephen Greer is talking about the government is now going to be portraying aliens as a danger or a threat to the civilization as a means of pushing forward this new world
Cranking up the
order
budget for the
government.
new Space Force.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think maybe that could be a topic for
I'd
a
be
different
wary
show.
of that. I would be wary of that because, I think if any advanced extraterrestrial beings wanted to take us over, they could have done it a long time ago.
Yeah, so in that documentary, he posits some interesting theories about the nature of reality being consciousness, reflecting Donald Hoffman's view on reality, and the idea that aliens are really traveling interdimensionally from extremely far distances, and that any observation of aliens locally isn't physically within this dimension, but is a reflection of their ability to use consciousness as a basis of travel and appearances. And that's why it explains why a lot of alien sightings come in and out of view quickly, and then, and do things that the normal law of physics, the standard physics, would not allow, but maybe could be explained by quantum entanglement and quantum mechanics as relates to what the nature of reality is. And so we can perhaps discuss that in a little more detail in a future episode right now.
Yes.
But lastly, I just kind of wanted to ask you, what do you think about stopping the border wall and making sure that we preserve or fortify DACA? I think that this is a really important step that the Biden administration is taking.
Stopping what? You're breaking up a little bit.
Sorry, DACA. Stopping the border wall and reinforcing or fortifying DACA.
Yeah, absolutely. This should be done. I continue to be puzzled by the xenophobia and paranoia that right-wingers have about illegal immigrants. There's just like so much paranoia on the right about illegal immigrants. Oh my God, what happens if too many illegal immigrants get into the country? So what? It's like, I just don't understand why this is such a driving issue with right-wingers. I guess this whole they took our jobs thing. The economy sucks already. Okay, if they're getting the jobs that most illegal immigrants are going to take are not ones that anyone wants anyways. And so it's just like I never have really understood the logic. I guess it ties into a xenophobia and fear of the other and racism and all that, because otherwise it just doesn't really make that much sense.
I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's the xenophobia is a product of racism and the view of white supremacy, and the fear of white people losing political and economic power in this country. And what we've seen in response to the border wall stopping and things like the memorandum on DACA are these news accounts of this caravan that's coming up through Mexico and Central America, supposedly with like 5,000 immigrants seeking entry into the country. And I've seen a lot of my right-winger friends, alt-right friends on social media posting it and saying, "Is this what you want? Is this what you want?" And my response is to post a photo of the Statue of Liberty and the quote on the Statue of Liberty. Like this is this country's founded on. We've got plenty of room for more people in this country. And if you've ever met someone who's come from one of these countries where they're willing to travel across a continent on foot to get to this country, those people make some of the best Americans that you could ever ask for.
Right. Because they're really grateful and to have the land of opportunity, even though the American dream is getting to be an increasingly endangered species for many people. And I like what you said about Lady Liberty, and this is something where, again, a lot of right-wingers just don't seem to get this at all, how the Trump regime has been raping Lady Liberty constantly for the past 4 years. And so these people just have such a narrow, myopic view of what American liberty really means, I think. And so that's something we have to get back to, just having some decency. And this is where the Biden administration needs to step up and not be hypocrites, because there's a lot of neoliberal policy that has sort of fostered some of these issues themselves. And so it's not like the immigration problems are all the Republicans' fault. But, again, what we've seen with the Trump regime these past 4 years is just going the wrong way at full speed, especially with the climate crisis. I like to use the analogy that of the Titanic. Whereas, because back, especially when left wing radicals were like, why should we bother voting for Biden? His policies is not going to be that much different from Trump. And Titanic analogy was one of my favorites because with Biden, at least he's going to slow down the speed of the Titanic. Whereas Trump was going full speed ahead towards the iceberg. And there weren't going to be enough lifeboats for everyone. So we're still headed towards that iceberg as far as the climate crisis goes. But now we're slowing down and we're going to have a chance to take action. The left is going to have a chance to get our mutiny together to seize the ship and alter course before we hit that iceberg. That is still my hope. And so that's why we just got to keep on pushing left and get action on the climate crisis.
Well, I find it interesting that you approve of this Titanic analogy, because it seems, just watching the mainstream media and all of the accounts just glorifying the Biden inauguration, there's reason to celebrate the end of Trump, but I can't help but think if the celebration of Biden is the equivalent of pulling out the deck chairs on the Titanic, sitting down and listening to the violin and having a martini as we head straight for the iceberg. And then we can say, well, at least it's not Trump that's leading us into it.
You got to have a little pomp and circumstance with the new inauguration. I mean, it would be inappropriate not to have some fanfare. Okay, this was a momentous moment, particularly in evicting the Trump regime from the White House. That was something to be celebrated. And so, yes, I certainly did enjoy watching the Foo Fighters rock out playing Times Like These last night in celebration of sending Trump's foul domain packing. But yeah, we don't have time for the Democrats to just shuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic. And that's why this administration needs to get a lot bolder, and we need to get that Green New Deal and push it through. And so that's something where Biden still needs to be pressured because, right, he's not on board. And so we need to pressure him, and we need that Green New Deal, and we need to convince these right wingers that it's not going to destroy our economy. On the contrary, it's going to save our economy. And so, yeah. And that brings us just about to the end of another episode of Dispatches from a World Gone Mad. Final thoughts, Kevin?
I would just say that while everybody else was celebrating yesterday the Biden inauguration, I took a sigh of relief, but I wasn't celebrating. We've got work to do. Let's keep it up.
I was celebrating the end of Trump's foul domain. To me, that it was all about that, not about Biden. And so, yeah, I was drinking plentiful beer mimosas yesterday. And but now, yeah, it's time to get down to business. Let's get it done.